Hi. A few months ago, I had a conversation with Tom Newmark, who had founded an organization called the Carbon Underground. And you may want to watch that video as well, because I found it so interesting that I wanted more of his time. So we set up a watch party on Facebook so that people could all look at it together and then get together for a conversation on Zoom with Tom in person. The people who showed up for the conversation are mostly two of my friends, Peter Meincke, who is a retired physicist and formerly the president of the University of PEI, and my assistant, Adam Wynne. And in this conversation, I'm asking Tom about why he hasn't been home for so long, and it's because of the pandemic. How long has it been since you were in Costa Rica?
That's the problem. We left in February of last year. So our
You can't
home,
go back? Or what is it?
there's no tourism. Our lodge is shut down. Our kitchens are shut down. COVID is unchecked, and the population is undisciplined in its response to it. Well, we have our farmers on either full-time or half-time.
Oh.
So the farm is doing fine. Even in the little villages where we are, COVID has hit and hit hard enough that it's putting a strain on the hospital system there. So if I'll stay in the States where, God forbid I get sick, I can get better care. But I hope to get back once I feel confident that the vaccine works and that I'll take it. I'll make my way back down to my farm and my home.
Tom, I'm amazed about Costa Rica because it's been so far ahead in so many things, with its stance on, done away with its military. I've watched all of the things. I, in fact, had a chance to talk with one of the former presidents there, who I think established the Peace College there. I can't believe that they're not coping with COVID.
They had no issues at all. Trivial. I mean, we're for months and months, and then there was a meltdown in Nicaragua.
Oh.
And Ortega is a disaster, and was in COVID denial, and the population got overwhelmed, and the border is porous. So people from Nicaragua were coming into Costa Rica. And there were people who are Nicaraguans who were lawfully in Costa Rica, who were illegally going back to visit their families in Nicaragua. Costa Rica is a fantastic country. It did eliminate the military in 1948. It did do a major land restructuring, breaking up the big hacienda holders and redistributing land. Still is redistributing land. It has cradle to grave healthcare, and it has a really good educational system. It's not, again, its literacy rate is high, but most people are still, most men in particular, are still dropping out before high school.
Before high school?
At least where I am, at least in my part of Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are going, although now, I don't know what this year is like, but the economy is collapsing. 12% of the economy is tourism, and 12% is a big chunk to lose overnight.
It's so hard by the tourism business.
And I own a lodge. I own a functioning regenerative farm and eco lodge, and I'm glad I don't have any bank debt.
Our lifestyle is going to be affected for at least another year, if not longer. And then I wonder how many people are going to go back to traveling.
I think a lot of younger people are aware of the increased impacts on climate and environmental health that traveling has. I know, for example, cruise ships have insane emissions, like millions, the equivalent of 1 million cars a day in some cases. Even flights have very, very high impacts on the climate.
Costa Rica is a birder's paradise.
Oh.
It has 900 bird species. All of North America has 900 bird species. And Costa Rica, which is the size of New Jersey, the size of West Virginia. And so there's this enormous concentration of biodiversity. So if you're a birder on my farm, which is 100 hectares, on my farm, we have had 300 identified bird species.
Oh, wow.
And then there's a little tiny slip of land, the Panamanian land bridge. And that's northern Panama and Costa Rica. So we are the junction point of 2 continents and 2 oceans.
Based on that,
It's going every direction.
I've heard between North and South America, there's a gap, the Darien Gap, where there's no real road connections between the northern and the southern continents of America. Do you anticipate there'll be any environmental impacts should that gap ever be connected through road transport with the flows of goods north and south?
Boy, I've never heard of people putting major roads into the Darien. That would be dreadful. We need to let the jaguar and the harpy eagle have their habitat and stay out.
You're saying that it's not possible now for anybody. Well, could a motorcycle go from North America to South America?
There's these people have written books about this. They go from Barrow, Alaska, and then they go all the way down to Ushuaia in Tierra del Fuego. But they always, when they get to Darien Gap, it's a bit of a challenge because there's no real road connections, from my understanding.
I've been to Panama, but I've never. I mean, that's a place that I will want to visit because I'd love to see harpy eagles, and they're there. I've only seen one harpy eagle once in my life, and it was in a wildlife rehabilitation refuge center. You all are familiar with harpy eagles. You've heard of them?
No.
They're gigantic. They're stunning. They're prehistoric. They're
like condors or something that size?
Oh, I mean, I'll look one up and.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. That looks like a kangaroo to me.
That's a harpy eagle.
Okay. Oh, my word. Okay. And I had contact today with Derek Paul. He said Rodale had made some statement about how it'd be possible to get rid of all of the excess CO2 by organic farming. And I wrote back and I said, I think it's more than organic farming. I think that my impression is that the term organic is kind of a subset of the larger category of regenerative agriculture. And it would be good for you to talk to Tom about exactly what these terms mean and the different branches of people doing this kind of work. I remember even when I was young that there was something called Rodale, and that had to do with, experimental or different kind of gardening or agriculture.
Rodale is very much still in existence. Its institute is vigorous and doing lots of research. It is focused on organic, and it is an advocate of regenerative and organic agriculture. When you said earlier that organic is a subset of regenerative, I would argue that they're really different concepts altogether, and their Venn diagrams can have some overlap, but not necessarily. You could be completely 100% organic and completely not regenerative. Being organic is that you are in compliance with the inputs that are permissible under different nations' organic programs. So in the U.S., there's the U.S. NOP, National Organic Program, and there are international standards promulgated, for example, by the International Federation of Organic Agricultural Movements, or IFOAM. And you can be organic and absolutely be destroying your ecosystem.
Really?
Of course.
How so?
Well, this goes back to how soil is created and how carbon is sequestered, and how the ecology, and Peter, you're a scientist, so you jump in when I overstep my bounds and say something wrong here. But the way we now understand soil to have been created, and we're going back 460 million years, back when, whether it was Pangea or Gondwanaland or whatever, but when that early landform was rock, and there was biology abundant. There were plants in the ocean. Algae was there, and maybe back then, I don't know whether liverworts had formed or whatever, but early expressions of botany were present in the oceans, but they hadn't gotten a grip. They hadn't created that toehold on hard rock. And scientists now are hypothesizing that the happy coincidence or the inevitability of the convergence of plants with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria, that those three came together, bacteria able to solubilize mineral salts, some of those mineral salts becoming indispensable foods for the plants, and then the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi creating the conduits, the delivery system to deliver those solubilized nutrients on rock surface to the plants. And then it was over that geologic time, it's so vast, that soil began to form. And that's when huge changes in the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere occurred. You had a very oxygen poor, CO2 dominant, not dominant, but CO2 rich early atmosphere. And then through photosynthesis, once plants got a toehold on Earth, you had the gradual formation and deposition of soil. And what we now know, and this is still evolving, the science is as recently as last year, some of the most important papers were authored on this. It turns out that about 99% of the organic matter in soil comes not from the decomposition of litter, not from the decomposition of dead organic matter, but from the life cycle of microorganisms in the soil. Somewhere around 50 to much larger, and there's not a precise number yet, but certainly north of 50% of all organic matter in the soil is simply necromass. It's the glues and gums left over from the excretion of food by the microorganisms and by the dead bodies of microorganisms. And what we've learned is that there are two energy systems going on in the soil. There is anabolism and catabolism occurring in the soil, and the soil builds up catabolically, and the soil breaks down anabolically. Am I doing that right? No, the other way around. The other way around. Excuse me. Peter's my truth squad. The soil breaks down via catabolism and builds up anabolically, and there are decomposing microorganisms in the soil that would hungrily, rapaciously devour any organic matter that those microorganisms can get their mitts on. So how then could organic matter build in the soil? Well, it turns out that the necromass has to migrate to soil pores that are safe haven, that are refuges from the decomposing microorganisms. And those pores in the soil that are inaccessible to decomposing microorganisms, to the catabolic processes, are created by the root hairs and fine roots of plants. Mm-hmm. And in order to create the refuge, those pores have to be between 30 and 150 microns in size. And you need a multiplicity of depths and forms of those pores in order for the organic matter created through the necromass, the life cycle of microorganisms, to migrate into them. So what people are now realizing is the whole story of regeneration, the whole story of generation in the first place. In the beginning, 460 million years ago, it was water and rock. And how did it end up being ocean and vibrant ecosystems with biological diversity?
So you mean there was no water? There were no oceans back then?
Oh yeah, there were primordial oceans that were teeming with life.
Okay.
But they hadn't colonized the land.
Yeah. And
it wasn't until, there was a paper that came out a week or so ago on early fossil remains of plants and mycelia dating back 460 million years ago. this is all fairly new, certainly, and Peter, educate me if I've missed something.
I'm a physicist.
But this is all in the last 10 years that people have discovered this ballet that occurred in ancient times between the different domains of life that permitted the colonization of hard rock. And so you could rewrite the book of Genesis. In the beginning, it was water and rock, and then through the synergy of plants, bacteria, and archaea and fungi, soil was created, and from that soil, all life emerged.
Mhm.
And so, but we've learned though that it takes biodiversity. It takes many different types of plants with roots of different sizes and depths. And those plants with their different leaves collecting solar energy. That was, whoops, that was my grandchild. Uh, and photosynthesis is that magic whereby photons of energy from that nuclear reactor in the sky are captured, and then that energy is used to break apart H2O and CO2, right? And reconstruct carbohydrates out of that mixture of nutrients, releasing from H2O oxygen, and then the carbohydrates are formed. And why do plants create carbohydrates? Well, because that's the currency. That's where you store solar energy. And so
Two questions, if I can. One is, somehow this conversation came out of the question about what would Rodale be doing that might do
right.
harm.
I'm getting there.
That's
I'm getting there.
Questions. Huh? You're getting there.
I'm getting there.
Beg your pardon. All right. Sorry. Onward.
I promise.
Okay.
But with only a few, so I thought I'd elaborate.
Oh,
No, it's absolutely new to me. It's wonderful. Go on.
So plants then use those sugars, those carbohydrates, for their own metabolic requirements. But plants have this genius ability. They speak CO2. They can use CO2 as part of their energy creation storage system. But if you're a microorganism, you don't have access to CO2 quite in the same way. But what's weird is that even though plants are, a lot of their biomass is above ground, they can't speak nitrogen in the form that nitrogen exists in the atmosphere. They don't have the ability. Plants can't fix nitrogen to make it botanically, biologically useful.
Isn't that what some plants like lentils do? Or, they do.
They don't do it, but the bacteria, the rhizobial bacteria that are nitrogen fixing, those bacteria make a home on the root hairs of legumes and other nitrogen fixing plants. And it's the bacteria that can actually interact with the nitrogen that is present in the ground, and they can fix it. It's called fixing, and I'm not sure, and I'm neither a chemist nor a physicist, Peter, but the fixing process somehow changes the molecular form of the nitrogen, much like the Haber-Bosch process takes nitrogen and turns it into a type of ammonia that can be used in fertilizer. In that same way, microorganisms can fix nitrogen, change the molecular structure of the nitrogen molecules, and make those nitrogen molecules available to plants. And that's critical, because without that, you don't have amino acids and proteins, and you must have it. But why would the bacteria live on the root tips? Why would the bacteria so busily fixing nitrogen? Why would they give that nitrogen to the legume? Why, for that matter, would the phosphorus solubilizing bacteria give the phosphorus to mycelia to deliver to the root tips? I mean, why? What's in it for the bacteria and the fungi? And the answer is they want those carbohydrates.
Mm.
Exchange. Yeah.
They will work for food. So there's an underground barter system.
Mm.
And the underground barter is the plants make more carbohydrate than the plants need. They exude the carbohydrates through the root tips, along with signals. I need phosphorus. I need manganese. I need zinc. I need selenium. I need nitrogen. Who's got it? Because I've got this to swap for it. And if you think I'm anthropomorphizing it, no, this is what's happening. The plant has a need for a nutrient, and there are chemical signals exuded at the root tips where it's all happening in the rhizosphere. And at the root tips, the plant signals, I need phosphorus. What happens then is arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi literally go inside the root tip and create a structure inside the tiny filament of the root hairs that looks like a tree. So the mycelium literally goes into the root and creates this tree inside the root tip. And that's why it's called arbuscular, arbol, right? That's why, because it looks like little trees inside the root tips. And then the mycelium communicating with the phosphorus solubilizing bacteria, the mycelium then transfers phosphorus into the root in a biologically available form, and the swap occurs. So there's literally a commodity exchange going on in the ground.
Yeah.
So if you fertilize synthetically, if you're a chemical farmer, you shut down that system, because the plant is going, I don't need to share my carbohydrates, because I've got this stupid farmer who's paying good money for NPK, for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And the farmer's giving it to me in a solubilized form. So I don't need to give the food web any carbohydrates. So that shuts down the soil formation process, because if the microorganisms aren't being fed, then they're not pooping, they're not excreting, they're not multiplying, they're not dying, necromass isn't forming. So you can see how the conventional farmer is just ruined the whole commodity exchange. But there's another way that a farmer can ruin that exchange. So remember I said the whole genius is the necromass has to migrate into soil pores to be safe from the decomposing, the catabolizing microorganisms. Well, what if you're plowing? What if you're taking the disc and ripping apart the soil constantly, 18 inches or more in depth, tearing apart the soil, ripping apart the mycelial threads, ripping apart the soil pores, exposing the cotton candy that's migrated into those soil pores to the hungry masses of children, otherwise known as decomposing bacteria, that now have all of this organic matter available. You've got sunlight, oxygen, and the soil structure broken down. So every time you pass that blade of the plow through the soil, you were breaking down the soil structure, and you were releasing the carbon that's been locked into the tilth or humus. It's released, and that's why you get this off-gassing of CO2.
I think in the video, you said something that I just watched it again, and it was again re-impressed, because you said something like 50% or more of the excess carbon in the atmosphere that we don't want up there came from plowing and misuse of the soil by agriculture. Right. That's still go on.
Right. So I read a paper last week saying it was 30%.
30?
And 30. I've read other papers saying 47 to 51%. I think that I don't want to get too fine with the exact percentage, but certainly there's no doubt that somewhere 30% or north of the anthropogenic CO2 in the atmosphere came from agricultural malpractice. I mean, that's why Jared Diamond, the great anthropologist from UCLA, Guns, Germs, and Steel, he describes the Neolithic revolution, the invention of the plow, as mankind's greatest mistake, because that started to end the conversation between humans and the soil and the environment. And rather than have a conversation, it became an Achtung. It became an order. It became human will imposed on the ecosystem, not in a conversation with, but in a dictate.
Well, you know, sorry to detract you from your point, but other things that anthropologists have said that I was reading 10, 20 years ago, they claim that wherever hunting and gathering societies were forced to take up agriculture, and they don't do it because they like it. It's a lot more work, and they resist the idea. But wherever a society becomes an agricultural society, the death rate goes up. And you can tell from the bones that people simply don't live. There is something like 10 years less life expectancy, because they're a lot healthier if they're hunting and gathering than if they're agricultural. I don't know whether this fits with Jared Diamond's point, or even whether it's true or not, but that was what I was reading some years ago.
I think it's true, and I think that since we're talking about anthropology, have any of you on this call read Daniel Quinn's writings, like Ishmael or The Story of B or the like? I mean, Metta, you might really enjoy the book Ishmael, which is an anthropological story. It's a novel, but it's and the names aren't changed. So it's a nonfiction novel based on that tension between hunter-gatherers and the agrarians, between Cain and Abel, and it's a remarkable. It's a show of hands. Who's read Ishmael?
I haven't even heard of it before. Sorry.
Okay, that's a signed reading before our next call. And then, but let me go back to this was the hour-long answer to your question. So if you're an organic farmer, you need to deal with the commercial pressure to have commercialized production where your costs are driven low, and with an ease of planting and an ease of harvesting, and you're going to deal with weeds.
Yeah.
Because if you're the old school organic farmer, your big problem is I got weeds. Well, the modern thinking of organics is weeds are simply opportunistic plants that are pioneering species occupying damaged land to begin to repair the damage in the land. So the weed is not so much an enemy as it's an indicator that the land has been damaged, that the soil has been disturbed. I mean, when I walk out into the rainforest, I don't look around and say, look at all the weeds.
Oh.
There aren't any weeds. There are just plants that are filling their niche in the ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So, but if you're an old school organic farmer, you're thinking, I got to get rid of the weeds. So how do you get rid of weeds? What's the weed control if you're an organic farmer?
I don't know.
Come on.
Right?
Well, that's very very labor intensive.
You just pull them.
So is there another, what?
You just pull them up and chop them with a hoe.
But that's very labor intensive. So if you're in the United States, that's like hopelessly expensive to the hand labor to pull up all the weeds. So there's another way to do it.
Is it grazing?
Well, you plow them under.
Plow them under.
Oh.
But that isn't that. So organic farmers can plow. Is that the distinction?
That's the problem.
Okay.
That's the problem. Okay.
And if I may ask as well, invasive species, you're saying weeds fill a niche within certain ecosystems, but then you do have these species, for example, Japanese knotweed, which is a huge situation all over the world. How would you recommend controlling plants that will take over and choke out other species in an organic method? Because if you have an introduced species that's not native to an ecosystem, it can cause massive devastation and entirely change the dynamics of what grows there and even choke out a pre-existing ecosystem.
So I'm not an expert on dealing with Japanese knotweed, although I've studied it. And by the way, it's a remarkable, it's a nutritional powerhouse. It's a phytomedicinal cornucopia of healing. It has remarkably high levels of resveratrol, which you think of from red grapes and from wine, but Polygonum cuspidatum, which is Japanese knotweed, is a remarkable medicinal plant, and it also tastes good. And you can cook with it like rhubarb. So maybe the way to deal with it is to simply eat it.
That is a good point. I guess Japanese knotweed is just one example, but how do you ensure that it doesn't cause devastation to an ecosystem? We have situations here, and there's other species beyond Japanese knotweed where yes, you can eat it, but if you don't keep it in check, it will kill out, say, 50 other species growing in an area and cause massive devastation through that. So it is edible, and some other invasive species are, but is there a way you would recommend kind of approaching regenerative agriculture within that aspect of introduced and invasive species and finding that balance?
So the basic principle of regenerative agriculture, and again, let me just finish up. Organic agriculture plows plants in rows and uses plants in monoculture. So you get a row of organic corn, a row of organic hemp, a row of organic soy, whatever it is. Well, that's not how nature produces food. Nature doesn't produce food in a dumbing down linear monoculture. And you never see bare earth in a healthy ecosystem. Never. Why? Because think of all the photons of solar energy falling on the bare earth and going to waste, just heating up the ecosystem, not being converted into carbohydrates, not fueling the carbohydrate formation. So in an ecosystem, it would just be not rational to have bare earth. It simply is not the way. You don't see bare earth in pre-Columbian North America. The Great Plains were spectacular, with enormous biodiversity, no bare earth. The rainforest, the grasslands, and the forests around the world, you don't see bare earth anywhere. So if a farmer, organic farmer, is farming with what's called bare fallow, so it has, it has its crop and then it plows it under and then it's bare, that is not the way nature produces food. And that creates an opportunity for erosion, which is why we lose 35 billion tons of topsoil a year through either erosion or through catabolism. I mean, think about that, 35 billion tons. It's a half a ton of topsoil for every human on the planet just lost because of agricultural malpractice. You have, whether it's 30% or 50% of the anthropogenic gases, even right now, of CO2 coming from the broken food production system. There's a book called The Great Climate Robbery by an NGO called GRAIN, GRAIN, who carefully explains how every aspect of the modern food production and delivery system is basically designed to screw the planet. And if we don't fix the food system, doesn't matter how much we decarbonize our economy, we have to recarbonize the ecosystem. I mean, we already have 1 trillion tons of excess CO2 in the atmosphere. That's not going away unless we put it somewhere. And where do we, and by we, life on Earth puts it somewhere. I mean, it's already there. We're already at 415 more or less parts per million of CO2. We started pre-industrial levels of around 270. That's 1 trillion tons of CO2 that's heating up the atmosphere. It came from underground. It's got to go underground. There's no other place to put it other than the oceans, God forbid, right? They're already acidifying too much. So, well, how do you put it back underground? Well, how did it get there in the first place? 460 million years ago. It got there through this ballet in the soil food web. And so the regenerative solution is farm with biodiversity. Do not use monoculture. Do not farm.
Is monoculture agricultural malpractice?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
It's a pretty good slogan. I'm happy. We could make a bumper sticker of that. Tell me, if I can divert you a little bit again, what do you know about Miyawaki forests?
I don't know anything.
Oh, okay.
So tell me, will you send me something on that?
Yeah, I've done one talk show, if not more, on that. there was a Japanese botanist named Miyawaki who tried to reconstruct ancient forests of Japan by selecting seeds from forests that circled various temples where they had not been allowed to bring in, invasive species or foreign things. So he collected, he was very careful in collecting things. And he developed a method of planting forests where he would put them very close together. He would select trees, and these are just trees, but some of them very like shrubs. So he would select them and put them about 4 trees per square meter in his plant, because he says they won't all live, but they'll let them decide which ones they're going to thin out. So he put, and they are planted in such a form that there will be a different heights of canopy, some tall trees and just the right distance away from medium-sized trees, et cetera, different levels of canopy. And they're all absolutely to be indigenous trees and plants. And I've seen the results of these trees, which he plants in cities as well as other places, but it can be done on even a parking lot, as something that's, the size of a tennis court, or somebody's, where you put your swimming pool instead or something. And so they can be very small, but they're very, very dense. They grow extremely fast. You have to water them and weed them for a couple of years. And after that, they're very dense forests, but they are spectacular in their growth and in their hardiness. And so I interviewed.
Well, let me respond to that quickly, if I might.
Yeah.
I'm not heard of that person in Japan, but there is a somewhat, forgive my pun here, analogous concept called analog forestry.
Okay.
Which is, let's replicate the strata that you would see in a healthy ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look up analog forestry, it's similar to what you're describing,
Mm-hmm.
where the whole goal is to have tremendous biological diversity, but where the plants are designed to be at different strata.
Mm-hmm.
And that, by the way, is how I farm at my farm. We use agroforestry or agroecology, but the whole idea is you need polyculture multistrata. Those two terms, polyculture, lots of different plants collecting sunlight with different leaf forms and shapes and heights,
Mm-hmm.
with lots of different roots, creating lots of different pores, creating lots of different safe harbors for the necromass. And you want it at different strata because you want to capture as much solar energy as you can and create all the different microclimates that different strata can create. So that's called analog forestry, and it's kind of a subset of agroecology, which is, I think, the way we need to grow our food. And
now there is a company in India that has picked this up. It's called Afforest, AFFORESTT, I think. And the guy who runs it is was an Indian engineer at Toyota or someplace. And Mr. Miyawaki came and built a forest for them. So he picked up the idea and is building forests all around the world in people's backyards, et cetera. So it's really quite extraordinary. I'll send you the link to the talk show I did with
I would like that. I would like that.
But just to say thank you very much, Tom, that was fascinating. And I want to share with you something I've been reading lately, is how trees communicate through their roots. And if you plant them too far apart, they get lonely. Anyhow, it was fascinating. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
A real pleasure. Take care.
Bye.
Last thought, because before I have to leave as well, when you mentioned that this Japanese visionary looked at areas around temples, because the representation of trees and plants there were undisturbed. That's also true. It's true all over the world,
Mhm.
and in the Himalayas, and in particular in Tibet, there's a tree called sea buckthorn, Buckthorn, sea buckthorn, which is a sacred tree, and it was planted around temples. So even though the area had been devastated by human invasion and ripped apart, because these trees were sacred, groves of them were preserved all through Tibet, and they are incredibly medicinal and significant trees.
Mm.
So it turns out that shrines, temples, churches, and the like can have an ecological upside every now and then.
Ethiopia. I've seen maps of Ethiopia where you see in this desert, you'll see little green spots, and it's always a temple with the protected forest right around it.
Right. So we need to treat the whole planet as a temple. That's the take home from that.
So much a treat to talk to you, Tom. It's marvelous.
Pleasure.
Really.
I'm glad to do this. We can do it again sometime,
Yeah.
and patch me in and keep me and send me things that I should be reading. I like to learn from you.
You're not off the hook yet. I'm gonna keep you.
To be continued.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This conversation is one of the weekly series Talk About Saving the World, produced by Peace Magazine and Project Save the World. Please visit our website at tosavetheworld.ca, where you can sign the Platform for Survival, a list of 25 public policy proposals that, if enacted, would greatly reduce the risk of 6 global threats to humankind. Come back next week for another discussion of a serious global issue.